Why are developers using IDEs? What is an IDE? What can an IDE do? Which IDE to choose? Should you use an IDE as an aspiring programmer? That's a lot of questions. So let's start exploring them. Let's start with an overview of what an IDE is. In very simple terms, an IDE is a text editor. Period. Nah, just kidding. IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment. An IDE is a text editor on steroids. Seriously on steroids. More on this just in a sec. An IDE assists you while writing code. There are many IDEs out there. Most of these support more than one programming language. Many are built in a modular way which allows the user to add functionality and customize the IDE to your preferences and needs. This is for advanced users. At Saravji Basecamp, we focus on the basics for aspiring programmers. For this tribe, the aspiring programmers, I suggest using Anaconda. The why and what on this is a different video. I'll link it up there and drop a link in the bio. Anaconda comes with the IDE Spider installed by default. I'll simply be using Spider as an example. Sure, there are more elaborate IDEs out there. There are more modular IDEs out there. There are more customizable IDEs out there. There are many IDEs out there. Let's focus on the basics and fundamentals. On that level, most IDEs more or less are the same and any would do. When code is written in its source form, it is stored in basic text files. I put in the qualifier source form here as some languages need to compile the code for a computer to use it, while other languages, Python being one of them, do not include this step prior to running the code. We are looking here at the source code, the code as written by the programmer. When Spider is started, there are a couple of main sections obvious right away. Here on the left we have the code editing area. This is basically your text editor. Here on the right bottom we have a console window. This is a mix of a terminal window and an interactive Python environment. In here you'll be seeing the output of code you run within the IDE. You also can use Python interactively to experiment with code snippets or try out statements. Up above you can see documentation snippets for code you highlight. An additional tab shows you the Variable Explorer. This shows you the currently active variables and what values they hold. Let's go back to the editor window and explore how an IDE helps you coding. First and most obvious, there's the syntax highlighting. You can see without even reading or understanding the code that there are different components. And the type of component is highlighted in different colors. Why is this so helpful? For one, it creates a picture of your code. You'll experience that when you're looking for a certain section of your code, you'll be able to scan quickly and identify the relevant section by this picture. This is a nice side effect. What the highlighting is mainly useful for is while programming. While you're typing your code expression by expression, the changes in color will signify the correct type. It won't take you long to unconsciously pick up on mistakes you're making and immediately correct them. This saves a lot of time, as you won't need to circle back, reread, and search. The highlighting is not limited to color, but also can include italic, bold, or underlining. The scheme is selectable. There are a few presets that you can use, or you can define your own. Code completion is another very powerful and useful assistant. For one, the moment you start typing, for example, a variable name, you get the options of all variable names that start with the same sequence in your text document. But more importantly, the moment you add a dot at the end of a class and variables are of the class of the variable type, immediately all possible functions show up as a possible autocompletion. Continue typing and the selection gets reduced to the ones still available with the start of this sequence. Simply using tab autocompletes the function name, including the parentheses and required or optional attributes. You don't need to remember all the attributes out of the documentation. The IDE pulls them in for you and puts them right there into the code for you. Adding to-dos into your code assists with keeping track where work still needs doing and what needs to be done. An IDE will understand the key to do and highlight it and even show on the scroll bar where there are still to-dos in the file. An IDE allows you to fold code. This means you can hide parts of the code that you don't need at this time. This saves real estate on the screen and removes distractions. By simply highlighting a keyword, a hint text comes up that shows the official documentation for this item. Additionally, a more complete version of the official documentation can be pulled up in the help pane. By highlighting a variable name or function name, all other occurrences of the same name will be highlighted within the current file. Now that we have covered what an IDE is, the basics of what an IDE can do, and how this is useful, the next question is, why use an IDE? I'm sure it's obvious by now by how much an IDE assists programming tasks. Using an IDE allows you to focus on your programming and stay on track of your thoughts. It helps you to reduce distractions from your core programming workflow. It helps you focus on the actual programming. If you've done a bit of searching or you have seen posts of a certain flavor, a question will be whether aspiring programmers should use an IDE at all or learn old school in a plain text editor without the help. My take on this is that there is a time and reason for both approaches. If you're attempting to learn one of the more fundamental programming languages, and if your goal is to create very close to the hardware and highly specialized software, being able to work without the aid of an IDE makes sense. But even then, it is not required. As this content is for a tribe around learning the foundations with Python, we are looking at a more modern, higher level programming language. Here it is perfectly fine to use an IDE. I'll explain with this metaphor. If you want to eat, you don't need to know how to hunt nowadays, unless you want to learn how to survive alone in the wilderness. Then knowing how to hunt helps. Which leaves the last question, and probably the most contested one. Which IDE to use? I'll put it plainly. In the early stages of learning to program, You won't be using the advanced capabilities of any IDE. You're going to be using the basics. As such, it doesn't really matter with which IDE you start, which IDE you use. My suggestion is to use Anaconda for your Python installation. It comes by default with Spider. This is the easiest choice as it is already available. It's also focused on Python development, so you don't need to fiddle with it to get it nicely to work with Python. In my opinion, it makes the obvious, easy, and least distracting and frustrating choice. But feel free to use whatever. It does not really matter at this early stage. Once you're joining a programming team, there might be a standard environment that is being used. Chances are you'll learn about more IDEs sooner or later. Then it simply comes down to what is available in the environment you're working in and what is your personal preference. I want to close out with a proverb. Give a programmer 100 hours to solve a problem, and they will use 99 hours to write a program that can solve the problem in 1 hour. Programmers automate things a lot. So if you find yourself wondering why you're repeating something, or if you think this could be easier, balance of probability is that there was already a programmer before you that thought the same and automated it. If you're after more insights into the foundations of programming, you should subscribe and join this tribe. Together, we venture to explore the world of programming and go beyond the horizon. There be dragons, stay safe.